On the day of his 30th birthday, Fringe Moruvian made a vow to treat this day the same he would any other. He woke up 5 minutes past his third alarm, though the alarms before it were separated by intervals of 1 minute, to lull him out of sleep in a manner that blended aggression and passivity well enough for him to make it routine. He brushed his teeth for a little, long enough to turn his first cup of coffee into a necessity of routine instead of an early morning treat, but short enough to allow him to feel he had the time to make himself the cup of coffee in the first place. Fringe stood up and walked into the kitchen, wishing he owned a little more, as cleaning his apartment would give him something to do to pass the time, as he already exhausted his typical outlet of staring at the wall. Fringe had never felt the need to buy himself food. Food was too fleeting for Fringe, a reward that never seemed to last enough for him to enjoy it. Maybe he simply ate too fast. He had often purchased foods he hated to make it easier to eat slow, but that always seemed to bring other problems into the mix. No, Fringe never felt the need to buy himself food because he would simply eat somewhere else. Why let himself cook when someone who is paid to do it better could do it for him? Maybe if he was lucky, his server would see his mildly excitable posture and buy him food to celebrate? He'd never enjoyed asking for gifts, but always secretly wished someone would get him one, even when told not to. Pipe dream, to be sure, but Fringe had always been a dreamer, especially when he had nothing better to do. Fringe arrived at his favorite place to eat, which was coincidentally the very same bar in which he worked, a detail he tended to omit when explaining it to new friends, fearing it may sully the experience for new patrons. A fear stemming from his own fear of people not agreeing with his tastes, although sometimes he thought he only developed that taste as a conniving way to get his coworkers to like him. This may mean this wasn't a coincidence, Fringe thought, but thinking further would be saved for another day, and Fringe needed to save his brain power for after he ate. The longer he waited, the longer that Fringe wished he would have come into work today. Well, he did come into work, he realized, just not with an attitude for working, since Fringe never would have let a customer go unserved for this long, especially when he knew them so well and knew there was precious birthday light being spent on this utter lack of drive. But Fringe sat still, wondering if his small moment of anger would blow over like any other. He had to remind himself that it was his actions that truly mattered, and as long as he kept his actions consistent with his good nature, no one would be the wiser. Though, thinking on this, he hadn't acted positively in a while either. He had said some words to his coworker that were carried down the succession of power that recently got his least favorite coworker fired, which ended up better for everyone in the long run, but Fringe always hated when bad things happened to people he disliked, almost as if he manifested them into being, simply through his thoughts.
Why, hello! I did not expect to see anyone at the bar today, as I thought it was supposed to be closed. Although, I doesn't remember closing it. Nonetheless, it's a wondrous day, and now it's twice as wondrous.
Fringe, self-centered as always, a trait he acknowledged in himself as he thought it was maybe the effect of his lack of friends, sometimes even managing to see it as the cause, thought this meant I had remembered today was Fringe's birthday. This was not the case, but Fringe couldn't help his excitement, which was quickly countered by his fear that he failed to remember there was a homeless man living in the bar in which he worked. Worse off, Fringe couldn't seem to remember the man's name, though this was simply the product of him not realizing the man in front of him was speaking in the third person, but his name just so happened to be I. He thought over every conversation the two had, and realized that he had never bothered to ask the man in front of him his name. He simply let him talk and tried to listen. And Fringe was very decent at this, something that Fringe took neither pride nor disgust in. He was but one man, and if he wanted to focus his talents on listening, he would never have chosen to be a bartender. Fringe settled on thinking that if actions speak louder than words, he should prescribe himself the act of listening, as if he listened now, it would speak louder than his blank thoughts.
Now, as I may have explained before, you and I have a long-standing rivalry. One that I has been able to find a solution for. Something to nip this growing competition in the bud and address a lot of other long-standing issues that I has been approaching in a less than productive way.
Fringe ignored this comment. but not without reason, as he was grieving the fact that his somewhat friend had not been talking about his birthday at all, and was instead looking for a friend himself. He decided to plan his next set of words accordingly, not realizing the opportunity to right his wrongs without speaking had already passed him.
Now, I understand that may have been confusing, because the you to which I was referring is not the you here before I, but the you of you and I's past. The brother of I. You. Not to say that you could not be a brother of I as well, but the blood brother of I. You. Nonetheless, would you like to help in what I is doing? Okay.
In this moment, Fringe finally saw an opportunity to act, though he had not been listening to anything that had happened in the conversation prior to this question. None of it mattered, since those were simply words, and words were simply invented as ways to explain people's good actions, so people could tell one another they were good-natured before the invention of the video camera. Fringe, walking around the crazed man's workshop, regretted his earlier wishes. Seeing the home of the unorganized, half-homeless man made him realize he did not want to own more things. It proved quite distracting, which would be a major detractor for guests if he had any friends.
I has found a way to make a man invincible. But I cannot be that man, because I has nothing to live for. And on the days he does have something to live for, he doesn't want to risk his life, because he has so many beauties left to see. And all he wants is to torment you for forever. Not you, I's brother, you, that is. But he doesn't want the grave moral consequences of having killed him, or the conjoining consequences of having to make friends in prison, because I refuses to be alone. That is why I must ask you if you'd like to be a test subject.
After a small buffer, Fringe processed the words that had been sent to him earlier, and, simply happy to be a part of something larger than himself, decided to join in. Though many others would be excited by the great gift that living forever could bring, Fringe tried to focus on the good he was doing by taking part in this experiment, helping a man who seemed to see everyone as his enemy. He was putting his life on the line for a man he barely knew, something that very few would do, especially when it was their birthday. As Fringe began the procedure, which was more invasive than Fringe originally speculated, as he had never undergone a surgery before, and didn't quite know what to expect, he thought of the good things that would come to him because of this good deed. He thought of how he wouldn't have to waste his time on trivialities such as food, as he would never grow hungry, saving much-needed time and money to ponder on things that held more value, wasting less and less of his ever-fleeting life. Fringe thought of the great values he could learn to ensure he was a good man, and the time he would have to do good unto others. He had spent so long pondering whether or not his actions were bad that he didn't spend time correcting them. As Fringe began to think thoughts that made him feel good about himself, he realized he had been ignoring the man performing the procedure. Though, to be fair to him, it was disguised within the great pains of having a drill plunged into the back of his skull.
Are you alive? Now for part 2.
Re-entering the real world for a moment, Fringe was stunned by the fact that there was a second part to this good deed. In this moment, the invincible Fringe encountered his first near-death experience, so the ever-frightful Fringe stepped back, though, as he was sitting, he simply moved. He wondered if he had even turned his lights off this morning, as even the most invincible of men are burdened with the paying of bills.
How about you and I take a walk?
Fringe became lost in his thoughts, and had the idea that he should go for a walk. It felt novel to him, as he never gave himself the opportunity to do nothing but think, even if it was the only thing he ever did. and walking was the best way for one to sort of their thoughts, unless they have a dog, or a strange breed of cat. Was he really willing to sacrifice his fear? He had believed himself to hate it, but maybe it was a good quality of himself. And if he never were to die, what fears would he even have? He could embarrass himself in public, but in that case, moving would be easy, as always was, and finding new people was relatively easy, though he had never tried it before. Plus, if he wasn't truly invincible, how would he feel about dying right now? This cyclical fear took over Fringe's mind, which was multiplied as he was too dissociated to pay attention to his somewhat friend who was at this time desperately trying to kill him. Dying to his own indecision, Fringe looked at the sky and realized that it was getting dark, and began to realize the day was growing old, and he would have to settle this mental debate another day. He turned to his today companion and made the decision to make a decision tomorrow, as he had not even eaten today, and any sane men would treat themselves to dinner of their 30th birthday.
This is a rather restful spot of concrete. I would even be willing to move so that you may experience it.
Fringe, wanting so badly to be kind, pretended to not hear the man, as he had done one good deed already today, and one bad deed would simply balance it out. As Fringe walked down the street, he thought about how he would navigate the situation of his invincibility, as he still did not wish to be killed, but the day was too old, and there was nothing else he could do to change that. Tomorrow would soon come, and it would bring with it more time to worry about the interpersonal dynamics of him and that man whose name he still couldn't remember. He wandered down the street, thinking of how much ground he had to cover, both mentally and physically, but decided that the day was over.